was 19. I worked as a camp counselor at a summer camp. The job would be to entertain and chaperone a large group of kids with a bunch of other counselors for 3 sessions for the summer. That meant 3 different groups of kids would come at different points in the summer. Each group would come for 2 weeks, which meant I was away from home for this job for a total of 6 weeks. By the time the last group came, summer was more than half over, and I was ready to finish this job and get home. At some point during the second week of the 3rd session, and the final week of the job for the season, one of the kids in my group, named Todd, wasn't feeling good, so he wanted to go back to the cabin to go to sleep while everyone else was around the campfire. When we got back to the cabin for 10 to 12-year-old boys, I left Todd to brush up and go to bed. Upon exiting the cabin, a little girl, probably 8 years old, was waiting in front. She wasn't supposed to be in the section, especially not alone at this hour at her age. I asked her where her group was. She didn't answer me. I asked her what her name was. She said Willa. I asked her what her counselors' names were. She didn't answer. I took her hand and brought her into the front section of the cabin. Then I told her to wait there. I started to run across the camp to the other activity sections, hoping to find the girls' group. When I couldn't find them, I ran straight for the section with the girl cabins. I found one of the female counselors with a small group of 7 to 8-year-old girl campers, and asked her if she had any girls named Willa in their group. The counselor was certain there was no one with that name in any of the girls' groups, actually. Next thing I did was run back to the boys' cabin where I left the girl, with plans of bringing her to the front office building. When I got back to the cabin, however, she wasn't there. I went towards the back section by the beds and asked Todd if he'd seen a girl walk in there, to which he looked confused and said no. So now in a panic, I ran outside and looked in the immediate area of the cabin for the girl, when suddenly I heard a girl's scream come from the woods. I was beyond shook. I can't even come up with better words to use for how I was feeling when I heard that scream. I wanted to run for help, but I felt like whatever danger she could be in could be time sensitive, so I ran into the woods calling Willa's name. It didn't return any calls back for a while, and I felt like I was hopelessly running into the dark woods. Until finally, after some time, and calling the name Willa constantly, there was a scream echoing through the woods, very close this time. I continued a bit further, and there she was. That little girl named Willa. She was standing straight in front of a tree looking at me, as if she were waiting. I told her to come to me in a quiet voice as I slowly approached her, but then she turned and started running. I didn't know why she was running, but I had to follow her. She was surprisingly fast, but I kept up. I saw her slow down and stop ahead, though my vision of her was intruded by a few trees, as it was the whole time I was chasing her. I stopped and hid behind a tree, thinking maybe I could sneak up on her and grab her if I was quiet enough. And I noticed something in the near distance. It was some small, dim red light waving around behind some foliage. The girl then ran over to the light and apparently ducked down out of sight. I was trying to put the pieces together, just as I saw some larger figure emerge from where the girl had just disappeared to. And this figure was crouch-walking in my direction. I was able to put 2 and 2 together and assume this was some kind of trap. So I turned and sprinted all the way back to the campgrounds and ran straight for the main office. I spoke with the camp coordinator, Jackie, told her about the suspicious activity that just took place, and advised that all camp activity should be cut short for the night. Any incident like this would be treated very seriously for the safety of the children and the well-being of the camp's reputation. Authorities had been alerted about suspicious activity on the campground. They came, I helped them with their report, and they left. By morning, everything was back to normal. The season was over before we knew it, and that was that. I have my own theories of what I witnessed in the woods that night. The most logical has to be the possibility that a man was using that little girl, maybe his daughter, as some kind of bait to lure unsuspecting victims into the woods. And what would happen next? I have no idea. I'm glad I didn't find out. I've been through a lot of hellish experiences in my life, but this one takes the cake. It was about 20 years ago, so I was, I believe, around 20 years old. This was way before cell phones and navigation garments. I was working off the books for a media company at the time, who were paying me for my photography and videography skills. I had all of the top quality video equipment for the time, which held to today's standards would be like comparing a Nokia to an iPhone. I was being paid to go out into the wilderness and record hours worth of background footage of lakes, trees, etc. They would use this as stock footage for various documentaries and such. I drove about half an hour to find a good place in rural Maryland to do the shoot. Then I parked my car on a dirt road and hiked for a while, finding a few good shooting locations. It was good for me to get sunset and nighttime shots as well, as different times of day created different lighting for the videos. When I figured I had enough, I started packing up my copious amounts of equipment and threw my 2 bags over my shoulders and began walking. And walking. And walking. I started to realize I should have reached the dirt road where my car was by now. There came a time when I had to accept it. I was lost. I had absolutely no way of knowing which way was which. I'd done wilderness shoots before, and never had I run into that problem before, but usually I'd have a compass with me. Not this time. I kept walking for so long, it got to the point that I was letting out little cries to myself in stress, wanting nothing more than to just find my car and go home, feeling absolutely helpless. Eventually, after many hours, I came across a small building. It was an old house that appeared to be abandoned in the middle of the woods, indicated by the vines crawling up the sides of the home, plus the broken glass. Continuing to walk around in the woods in the night was the last thing I wanted to do, and seeking refuge for the night made more sense. I walked up the wooden stairs to the front door, which seemed to have already been broken in. All I had to do was push it with a bit of force, and I was inside. It was next to pitch black in there, and every step I took, I felt like I was stepping on rubble or trash. I did, however, manage to find the bedroom of the house, which still had a bed in it, mind you, probably a filthy bed at that. But it beat sleeping in the woods or hiking around any longer in the dark. I shut the door and plopped my stuff on the floor and arranged one of my bags to act as a cushion between me and the actual bed itself. Then I tried my best to fall asleep in this dark, abandoned, foreign location in the middle of the woods. It was surreal, and it was scary. The window in the room was broken, so I could hear the wind and bugs outside. But over that, there was the slightest, and I mean slightest little creak from a few feet away from the bed across this tiny bedroom. I looked up, and even though it was dark, I could vaguely see a closet door in the corner. It was moving. It had to be the draft. It had to be. I was letting my paranoia get the better of me in this freakish situation. But then, over the sound of the bugs and wind, I heard something from inside the room now. It was a gurgling type sound, like a throat noise. I looked at the closet again. Something was coming out from the darkness of the closet. I got up to grab my stuff off the ground. Within arm's reach now, I was staring at someone else in this room in this abandoned house in the middle of the forest. Here's my description of what I saw in the brief moments I was staring at this person. I saw a man wearing a woman's wig with some kind of makeup on his face. As for what he was wearing, I didn't really notice that, but I think it was something dark since I couldn't really see it. I grabbed my bags and started saying I'm sorry as I ran out of the house. I didn't know if this was their house or not at the time, but either way I didn't want any trouble. As I ran away from the house, I heard footsteps tailing behind me at first. I think this is when the adrenaline really kicked in, and I suddenly had this insane amount of energy to keep running until I felt I'd escaped. And even after that, I kept running, hopping over logs and rocks and twigs, trying to find a road, any road, with the logic that there's only so much forest left in the state, I'd have to run into a road eventually. And finally, I did. I walked down the road, and within 10 minutes, a car passed, and I hitchhiked my way back to my truck. On my way home, I had time to reflect. That house was absolutely abandoned. The door and all the windows were smashed open, there was trash all over the place. I can't use logic to explain it, because it's not explainable. I am grateful I was unharmed, though. My apartment complex sits in a pretty safe neighborhood, so I guess I'm naturally less on guard as far as break-ins and whatever. There was this one night I'd gotten home late from a bar with friends, and though I wasn't very drunk anymore, I was definitely still tipsy. To give a little context to my apartment layout, it's on the ground level and has 2 doors, a front and back. As I entered, I was in the living room, greeted by my dog Chester. Then I passed the living room to walk down a tiny hallway to my room. Chester followed, though he was acting a little weird. I jumped right into bed. I was exhausted. I fell asleep in minutes, and the next thing I remember is waking up to growling. I looked at Chester, who was standing up on my bed, looking at the far corner of the room. I sat up to see what he was looking at, but it was too dark. I had to flip on the lamp. That's when I noticed that he was looking at the closet door, which was cracked open just barely. Right away, I felt a pain in my stomach as I feared the worst. I lightly tapped him to get him to shut up for a second, and he looked at me and went silent. I got out from the bed as he watched me tiptoe closer to the closet. If someone was in there, I had to be ready to defend myself. So, instead of opening that door right then and there, I hurried to the kitchen to get a knife. Chester followed me. When I got back into my room, I don't know where it came from. I had a huge bout of confidence overcome me, and I rushed open the closet door fully. I was shocked, but also relieved to see no one inside. I called Chester an idiot as I went back to the kitchen to put the knife away. When I got back into the room, I saw Chester looking under my bed, growling again. I bent down to take a look, and there was a man hiding under my bed. We made eye contact for a second, and then I grabbed Chester and ran outside to knock on the neighboring apartment's door. My neighbor opened in his pajamas, and I begged him to let me in after explaining that someone was in my apartment. He let me in immediately and let me use his phone to call the police. The intruder wasn't in the apartment anymore by the time the police came and searched the place. If it weren't for my tiny little chihuahua who couldn't harm a fly, I may not have come out of this in one piece. My girlfriend and I love skiing. It's how we met. So last year, during both of our vacation times, we Airbnb'd a one-bedroom cabin in Colorado by Vail Mountain. One of my friends told us getting a private cabin was a lot more cozy, peaceful, and romantic. After landing at the airport, we taxied to a rental car place and rented a Honda Civic, probably the cheapest car we could get. We drove a constant uphill through the sludge on the roads until we pulled off the main road onto a more foresty side road. Eventually, we made it to the cabin. Far and isolated from anyone else, but not too far where getting to the mountain would be a pain in the ass. The owner left the key hidden in the mailbox. As soon as I unlocked the door and we stepped inside, we got a huge whiff of, wood. It literally smelled exactly how you'd expect a log cabin to smell. It wasn't huge, but it was spacious enough. One bedroom, one bathroom, decent living room with a TV, and a kitchen. I was paying chump change for it, so I was more than happy with it. Plus, we were there to ski, not sit around the cabin. We got there towards the end of the day, so we didn't hit the slopes that night. We actually just unloaded and got right back on the road to pick up a pizza for dinner. We got back and ate on the couch in the living room while watching a movie. With the dark, moody lighting and the whole log cabin atmosphere, it actually was quite romantic, until my girlfriend started freaking out about her bag. Apparently it wasn't where she left it, which was on the coffee table in the living room. I helped her look around, though there wasn't much space to search. She was absolutely positive she left it on the coffee table. It wasn't in the bathroom, kitchen, or living room, so I checked the bedroom, and sure enough, it was sitting right next to the bed. I picked it up and brought it to the doorway of the bedroom with a smirk on my face. My girlfriend didn't seem as relieved as I thought she would be, though. She accused me of moving it and going through her bag, which I found downright insane. We had a bit of an argument, until I convinced her that she in fact put her bag in there and that she had just forgotten. We went back to eating and watching the movie, and we got over the argument quickly. The next day, we hit the slopes from early morning till dusk. We stopped on the way back to the cabin to get dinner again. When we returned back to the cabin, we both immediately noticed the living room light was on. My girlfriend was slightly freaking out. I told her to chill. The front door was still locked, so that confirmed nobody had broken in. I thought obviously one of us left the light on by mistake and didn't notice earlier because it was bright out. So once again, we ate our food and watched a movie. When suddenly, out of nowhere, my girlfriend shrieked. I jumped up and looked at her. She had one hand covering her mouth, the other pointing at something on the ground. At first I didn't see it, but when I got up confused and moved closer, I saw it. There was a pair of somewhat fresh boot marks in the rug in the corner of the living room. The snow from the boots had melted into wet stains in the area rug. Obviously, both of us wore boots, but I just didn't remember stepping over there. My girlfriend asked me to check around the cabin to make her feel safe, so I did. I peeped under the kitchen table, behind the living room couch, in the bathroom, and I took a peep in the bedroom. There didn't appear to be anyone in the cabin. There weren't really many places to hide anyway. Still, she was scared and seemed to lose all interest in the movie. She went to the bathroom and brushed her teeth, then went to the bedroom to change, and I heard her jump into bed. So I did all the same. I climbed into bed and shut the light, and we sat there for a while just talking. It was actually only like 9 or 10 p.m. My girlfriend kept letting me know how uncomfortable she was, thinking someone was in the cabin. So I told her, okay, just wait 1 second. I took out my phone and dialed the Airbnb host. I put the phone up to my ear and heard it ring. I don't mean the ring coming from the phone speaker. I meant I heard a loud, muffled ringing coming from behind the wall next to the bed. The ringing stopped as soon as I saw my call was rejected. My girlfriend started screaming, "Oh my God." I told her to calm down as I got up and approached the wall to the left. I noticed an ever so slight crack in the wall that looked like it could be a door. My girlfriend screamed at me not to open it, but I got myself angry, yelled, and pulled open the door. There I was, faced with a small, hidden closet, and inside, a man hiding behind a cardboard box in the corner. It was the host, the owner of the cabin. I'd seen his picture on the listing. I'll admit, I jumped and screamed in fear and shock when I saw him, but anger overcame me and I grabbed him by his shirt and pulled him out. I knew he looked creepy based on his picture. He had his hands up, apologizing. I told him to shut up. I looked deeper in the closet, and to my disgust, found some of my girlfriend's underwear. It took way too long for the police to arrive, but he was arrested. We had to spend the rest of that night at a hotel, and the next day we went home. I requested compensation from Airbnb, and it took months for them to refund me, but they eventually did. This story was so bizarre and disturbing, I don't even expect everyone to believe it when I tell it, but it was too real. When my best friend Lizzie and I were 18, we went on our first vacation alone together to London. We were staying at the London Marriott Hotel. The first thing we did upon arrival was, of course, to get there and drop off all our luggage. We'd be there for a whole week, so we had to set our itinerary. It was late in the day already, so we didn't have much time that day, but we did want to see something at least, so we went to see Big Ben, which is that iconic big clock tower that everyone knows in pictures when you think of London. After that, we went to a nearby tavern for dinner called St. Stephen's Tavern. It was money, but good thing our dads were paying for this trip. After leaving the tavern, it was like 9 o'clock, and we were wanting to go out and experience the nightlife. We agreed we'd first have to go back to the hotel and shower and change first. As we were walking, a young, attractive man overheard us talking about the nearby bars we were looking at on our phones, and he stopped us. Something about him immediately was just charming that grabs both my and Lizzie's attention. And if it weren't for that, maybe we wouldn't have been so receptive to him telling us about a big apartment party that one of his rich friends was throwing that night, and that two attractive ladies like ourselves would fit right in. Lizzie and I looked at each other and laughed. We said we'd be down, and he said great, the party doesn't start till 11. He asked for my number, so I gave it to him. Then he said he'd text me the details and see us later, and down the street he walked. Lizzie and I were super excited. It was only the first night and we were already invited to a crazy London party. We figured if we played our cards right with the wealthy people at this apartment party, we would have people to hang out with the rest of the trip. We got back to the hotel, showered and changed, and we pre-gamed with a little vodka first to loosen ourselves up. I think we drank more than we should have, though. I texted the guy we met, realizing we didn't even get his name. He texted back quickly with the address to the apartment. So we loudly marched into the street to wait for our Uber. It was a 15-minute Uber drive to get to the apartment, and when we got there, we couldn't believe how different the architecture of this apartment building was compared to something back home in America. I pressed the code for the apartment, and we were quickly buzzed in. We took the elevator to the 5th floor. We were excited, but nervous, not knowing what to expect. The alcohol was definitely helping, though. I knocked on the door to the apartment, but we didn't hear music inside, which was odd. We were nervous we had the wrong apartment, until the young man from earlier opened the door. He hugged us hello, and welcomed us into this dead, quiet apartment. He shut the door, and we asked, "Where is everyone?" He said, "Oh, it's still early, don't worry." We looked around the apartment, and it was not at all as big as we were expecting for an apparent rich guy. We asked where his friend who owned the apartment was. The man said he was getting things ready in his room. He told us to sit and make ourselves comfortable. I remember looking at my phone and seeing it was like 11:30. Lizzie and I sat down, and I could tell by her face she was as put off by this as I was. The man sat down on the same couch as us, next to me. He was uncomfortably close. Suddenly, another man came out from another room. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He just looked at us as he walked towards the door to the apartment, and he just stood there. The man on the couch with us started asking us questions like where we were from and if it was just us two visiting here. I started feeling sick to my stomach. The man next to us got up and went to the kitchen to get us some drinks. The man by the door stood there. Lizzie was to the left of me, so she was more hidden from view. I whispered in her ear to dial 911. She did so, and I noticed her tapping on the phone multiple times, indicating to the call taker that we needed help. Lizzie then suddenly called out loudly to the man in the kitchen, "This is apartment 5C, right?" The man at the door said yes in a deep, unfriendly voice. I whispered to Lizzie again that we needed to stall, and not to drink any drinks the man gave us. As I was whispering to Lizzie, the man standing at the door called to the man in the kitchen to hurry up with the drinks, and then he came back from the kitchen with the drinks. I had to think on my feet, to stall as long as possible before drinking whatever he just set in front of us. I put on a fake and bubbly persona and said we should play Would You Rather. I know it sounds juvenile, but I had to think of a game that didn't involve drinking. The man seemed to play along with it, so me and Lizzie started coming up with Would You Rather questions. And he started coming up with some of his own, but he would often suggest we take a sip of our drinks, saying the guests would be there soon and that we needed to loosen up some more. I stalled for as long as I could, saying we already drank a lot, but we'd be down to drink more in a little bit. I remember when things were about to turn really south. The two men looked at each other. Then the bigger, scarier man at the door came over and said, "All right, drink your drinks." He was about to reach for one of the glasses to probably force in my face, when there was an aggressive banging at the door, followed by a man shouting police. The younger man looked at us and asked, "Did you call the police?" I said, "No, why and when would we?" But my voice cracked as I said this, indicating I was nervous. Lizzie apparently just decided the hell with my story and screamed help. The police started to attempt to kick the door down, but the bigger man screamed, all right, and opened the door with his hands up. The two men tried playing innocent. Lizzie and I had to fabricate the story a little bit, saying the two men basically forced us into the apartment and wouldn't let us leave, and that we were pretty sure they drugged our drinks. That was enough to get the men arrested. A second police car arrived to escort us to the station for further questioning. The drinks were tested, and it turned out to no surprise they were roofied. This was definitely a scarring experience, but we didn't let it ruin our trip to London. In fact, we never told our parents until years later, just because it would probably make them less likely to let us travel anymore. The alcohol definitely didn't help our initial decision-making in the night. But our advice would probably be don't ever trust strangers, no matter what they look like. When I was 14, my parents took us on a trip to a family resort. It was in the middle of nowhere, and it was the most countryish, old-style resort you could ever imagine. Every building was made of wood, there were big creepy bugs crawling around, the inside of the resort halls all smelled like cigarettes. I felt too old to be in there with my family, especially since I'm the only boy out of my siblings, and my sisters were 9 and 5 at the time. I tried looking for teens my age to make friends with, but it really seemed like it was just families with younger kids. However, I met this girl who was 15. We met in the little arcade hall when I was with my 2 sisters. She came up to me and said, "Hey." As it turned out, she was staying here with her family too, and she wasn't having a good time either. So we started to hang out. She seemed kind of cool, a little strange, had somewhat gothy vibes to her. Her name was Alyssa. The next day, I ran into her again as I was passing by the pool. She waved me over, and she said let's go for a walk in the woods by the river. As we did, I tried to get to know her more. I asked her what building her room was in. She hesitated before her answer and then said, "The one next to the main hall." It was a vague answer. We sat by the river for a while, and I gotta admit, she started talking about some weird, dark stuff. I won't get into it, but I started to think she had some issues. Then she looked up at me and said, "Can we go to your room?" I lit up with excitement inside. I was a 14-year-old boy, hormones raging, so obviously I said yes with a little too much excitement in me, imagining the best-case scenario. We got close to my room, and she asked for the card to open the door, and she ran ahead to open it. We sat on my bed for a few minutes. I was a bit awkward, so I didn't know how to make a move or if to make a move. She started talking about deep, dark stuff again, though. How she hated her family, how she had no more friends, how she likes the feel of blood, whatever that meant. Then out of nowhere, she flicked open a huge switchblade and looked at me. She told me sometimes she thinks about using this on herself or someone else. That was the moment this went from weird to disturbing. This wasn't going where I thought it was. It was actually going in a much darker, scarier direction. The way she looked at me with the knife flicked open was scaring me. She looked at me and said, "Do you want to use this knife on someone here?" I thought over my answer and said, "I don't know, I have to think about it." Obviously I would never, but this girl's true psychotic nature had just come out, and I had to play it safe. I said we should go back outside and walk around. She said okay. So we went back outside and walked around the resort grounds. I watched the way she looked at people passing by, staring them down, not caring when they would notice. Luckily I saw my parents straight ahead, and I said, "Oh shoot, there's my parents, I should probably go hang out with them." Alyssa looked a little bit annoyed. All she said was, "Okay." I said, "See ya," and she just looked at me. I went to my family, and for the rest of the day and night I stayed with them, hoping to not run into that freaky girl again. That night we got back to the room around 9. This resort had huge rooms, so basically I had my own room that was attached to my parents' and sister's room, but it also had its own door into the hall. Anyway, I went to sleep, or at least tried to. Half an hour into laying in bed, I heard the beep from the door unlocking, and then the door to my room opening and closing. By the time I fully looked up, the door was shut and the light from the hall was gone. I saw someone standing in front of the door, though. "Who is it?" I said. I heard a familiar girl's voice. "I want blood." I sat up and remembered I never got my key card back from Alyssa. She planned this. She approached my bed in the dark with something in her left hand because she had it lifted. She said it again. "I want blood. Will you help me, or will I get it from you?" I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like a goddamn girl. She still stood there. She didn't charge at me. She didn't run at first. When my dad burst into the room, though, that's when she took off. My dad saw her, and I yelled she was about to kill me. He was about to go after her, but I screamed, "Don't, she has a knife." Everyone in the hall came out of their rooms to see what was going on. We went down to the main office to get some info on this Alyssa girl, and out of all the guests, there was no one named Alyssa. Hell, there were no girls even close to her age staying at the resort at that current time. Police were called, and like 4 cop cars showed up and searched the whole perimeter. I think like 2 or 3 cop cars stayed overnight since there were so many kids at the place. The key card lock was changed on our door for the night. A lot of families, including mine, left the next day, and we got a refund for the 2 days we cut short. This whole thing was actually insane. That girl was fucked up in the head, and it's scary knowing she was probably in the early stages of being a completely different monster. For a very brief 2 months, I worked as a delivery driver for the app DoorDash. It was to make some quick money on the side on the weekends. I live in a suburb of Nevada, so deliveries are usually quick and close. Someone made a big order to a local burger joint, and I accepted the delivery. When the food was finished, I loaded it into my car and checked the destination on the app. It was a house across town in a cul-de-sac. I tended to drive quickly over the speed limit to get more deliveries out, aka get more money. When you drive like me, though, you're bound to get into some trouble once in a while. And this time, as I was driving up the block towards the cul-de-sac, I saw the sickening glow of the blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled to the side and got written a ticket for more money than I'd possibly even make that night. It was a horrible feeling that I'd spent my night doing deliveries only to end up losing money. Still, I had to finish this delivery, albeit a bit late now. After the cop got back in his car, I drove right down towards the cul-de-sac. I got to the house, ran towards the front door, and knocked really hard since there was apparently no doorbell. As I waited for the door to open, I looked around this dark cul-de-sac. I say dark because there weren't any streetlights, only the small amount of light that was given off by the 3 total houses sitting on the street. It was a pretty unusual dead end, not a nice looking spot by any means. The house wasn't exactly the prettiest either. The door finally opened, and an average height bald guy opened the door. He had a grayish beard with brown stains in the middle. His body language and way of behaving was immediately weird, screaming drunk or drug addict. To top it off, his breath was awful as he said, "How you doing?" in his loud, obnoxious voice. He told me to come in. I told him no, it's okay, as I held out his bag of food, waiting for him to grab it so I could leave. He said, No, come in, I got something for you. I told him, really, it's okay, I need to be on my way. He said something along the lines of not being able to tip me through the app, so he'd have to give me some cash money. Against my better judgment, I entered the house with his food still in my hand. I heard a car pulling up into the cul-de-sac as I stepped inside. As soon as I cleared the door, the man slammed it shut and told me to follow him to the kitchen and to put the food on the table. For some reason, even as uncomfortable as this guy made me, I followed him into his disgusting, messy, smelly kitchen. He went into his basement and told me to wait there in the kitchen. He shut the door and I heard him stomping down his steps. I stood there feeling awkward, but also nervous. There was a short silence, and I stood there looking at my phone, texting a couple friends about what I was experiencing currently. Suddenly, there was a huge crash from down in the basement. It sounded like a big shelf holding a bunch of smaller items toppling over, followed by what was a scream for help. It seemed as though the man was hurt by whatever had fallen down. I ran to the basement door and opened it, and to my surprise, looked down to see nothing but darkness. Not a single light was on. I called down into the basement, "You okay?" I heard the man moaning in apparent pain in the darkness below. I asked where the light switch was. Instead, he just kept saying, "Help." I used the flashlight on my Samsung to start walking down the noisy, creaky stairs. As I got maybe halfway down, the man's moaning sound stopped, and it was completely silent. I stopped as I realized how silent it had grown, and asked if he was still okay. There was no response. Suddenly, I got a really bad feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. I heard a small cracking sound from in front of the steps, like a pebble being crushed against a concrete floor. Then, there was a loud knocking at the front door upstairs. I turned and ran upstairs to open it, and it was the cop who had pulled me over about 5 minutes ago. He was holding something familiar, 2 folded pieces of paper paper-clipped together, asking me if it was mine. It was, and I grabbed it from him. But I also told him in obvious distress that I thought something strange was going on with this man who I just delivered food to. I told him it sounded like he got injured downstairs, but that it also seemed suspicious. I showed the cop to the basement door, and with his hand on his holster, he called down into the basement. I told him there wasn't a light switch, so he took out his flashlight and started walking down the stairs slowly. I waited at the top of the stairs as he progressed to the bottom step, then disappeared from my view. I didn't wait too long before hearing a commotion downstairs. The cop seemed to be yelling in response to being attacked. The commotion ended with a gunshot. Then there were cries of pain, genuine cries this time. The cop called up to me to come help him get the guy upstairs. He asked me to hold the flashlight as he guided the man who was now cuffed up the stairs. All the while, he was screaming in pain and at the cop. The cop brought him outside and called for an ambulance on his radio. He wanted me to stick around to sign a witness statement. I stuck around for about half an hour before I left and went home. Who would have thought the same cop who wrote me a ticket would potentially save my life 10 minutes later? I occasionally do some deliveries for Postmates, usually late at night after work during the week or on weekends. I use my motorcycle as it allows me to get from point A to point B faster. I was delivering some Mexican food to a guy named Ron. It was a 15-minute drive from the burrito place to Ron's address. When I got to the listed address, I brought the food up the long driveway and up to the front door. I rang the bell, and an older woman opened the door. I said delivery for Ronnie, but the woman looked confused and said, "There's no Ronnie here." I apologized and said I had the wrong house. So I went back to my bike and double-checked the app, making sure I was at the right house. And according to the app, I was. The house number was 15, just like listed on the app. I figured it was time to call this Ron guy to figure out if he had made a mistake with the address. I used the call feature on the app, but after one ring, it went to voicemail. So I tried texting instead, and within seconds, he replied back. I told him the address he gave me was wrong, and he swiftly said, yeah, sorry about that. He explained that he didn't actually live here, but that he was chilling with his friend in the preserve across the street from the house listed on the delivery. He requested I come into the nature preserve by the fire and drop it off there. He mentioned he was sorry about this and was planning on leaving a generous tip. One time before, I did have someone request I drop off their food at a park near their house, so at that moment it didn't seem like the strangest thing in the world. It was just a slight inconvenience, but one that he'd apparently make up for with the tip. The preserve was gated, but there happened to be an opening leading into it right across the street from the house. I followed the dirt trail until the light post ended, and any further I would be walking into complete darkness. I looked around for the light of the fire, and as a matter of fact, I did see a hint of light coming from the woods. I started making my way over into the increasing darkness of the woods, leaving the lit-up area. As I got closer, I could confirm it was light from a fire. Why were they in the middle of the woods, though? The question of why they were expecting me to bring it to them out there started to ring in my head. I yelled out Ron's name a few times when I was within yelling distance of the fire. No answer. When I got close enough, I noticed something. There was no one sitting around that campfire. I asked myself, was that the right fire? But that was a silly question. How many fires could there be on a weeknight in the preserve? I walked a little closer to the fire and noticed a tent behind it. Maybe they were in there. So once again, I yelled Ron's name as I approached the tent. It was zipped up. I tapped on the tent and said Ron's name again. So I finally unzipped the tent and knelt down to look inside. I saw someone laying down on their stomach, facing away from me, so that their shoes were only a few inches from my face. They seemed to be asleep. This was getting a bit ridiculous, so I just marked the order as delivered and turned ready to walk away. I didn't even make it a single step before noticing someone standing about 20 feet from me, between two big trees. He called out, "Are you alone?" "No," I said. "My friend is just over there." The guy asked, "Why aren't you alone?" I said I do my deliveries with a partner. He asked, "Where's my food?" I was about to tell him I was in the tent, when I felt two hands grab both my legs and tried pulling me down. I looked down and saw the arms reaching out from the tent. Ron, presumably the guy who I was just talking to, started charging at me. With only maybe 5 seconds to act, I did manage to escape the grasp of the two hands and run past Ron, if that was even his real name. I don't think he chased me after I left the vicinity of the fire. I found my way back to the bike easily, and I drove off without taking a second to look back. I contacted Postmates customer service about it. They told me I should escalate it to the police, as there was nothing they could do. By the time they even responded with that, I didn't even feel up to going through with a police report. I just figured I'd let it go. I got lucky and I was unharmed. Still, it taught me one thing. If your instinct tells you to turn and walk away, do it. For some reason, I never really used any of those food delivery apps until recently, after learning how convenient they are. One night after a late work shift, I didn't have time to make dinner, so I ordered some Chinese food off Postmates. It was originally estimated to be delivered in half an hour, but I waited a lot longer than that. Around the 45-minute mark is when I started getting impatient. I called the Postmate driver, and he picked up after a few rings. I asked him where he was. He asked, "Who is this?" I said, "Tracy, the girl he was delivering food for." There was a short silence. Then he said, "Oh yes, I'm on my way." So I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my living room with the TV on and basically just played around on my phone, dying for the Postmates driver to just show up already. Just then my phone started vibrating, and knowing that it was likely the Postmates driver calling me, I felt very relieved that the food was probably here at last. I picked up and waited for him to say something. I had to say hello like 4 times before he finally started speaking. He said he's outside. I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I said okay and then described my house to him. Then he said something weird. He asked me to come outside to get the food. I opened my front door to check if he was there, He wasn't. I asked him where he was as I stepped out onto the front deck. There was another pause. I looked around my whole front yard and didn't see anyone. I told him I didn't see him. He said, "I see you." Again, I didn't know how to respond, but the way he said it was just so creepy. The last thing he said before I hung up the phone was, "You look really pretty." At that point, I went inside and slammed my door shut and locked it. I opened the Postmates app, and it said my food was delivered. I didn't know what was going on here, but I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. I shut off all the lights in my house and started looking out each window. I started with the living room windows. Didn't see anyone. Then I checked the dining room windows. Nothing. Next, the kitchen. Still no one. So I went down to our den, which was by the back door. I hadn't raised the curtain that morning because of work, so I pulled the string to raise it up. Only a little bit. Just enough to peek under to check the backyard. This whole time I was looking out windows. I don't think I actually expected to see someone. But when I looked under the curtain to the den window, I saw a man sitting in my back patio. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there, as if he were waiting for me. I lowered the curtain back down, and then my phone rang. It was the guy again. I picked up, and he immediately said, "I just saw you at the window." All I said to him was, "I'm calling the cops," and I hung up. I went back to the living room and called the cops. The man on the phone said an officer would be over shortly. After I hung up, my phone kept ringing. There was the man. I kept rejecting his calls, but he wouldn't stop. Sitting there waiting for the cops was one of the most tense moments of my life. Eventually there was a knock at the door, followed by a man shouting "Police." I jumped off the couch and ran to open the door. I was confused to see not a man in a police uniform, but some man in some dirty street clothes who gave a disturbing smile as soon as we made eye contact. He opened the storm door and tried to get in, but I pushed the front door hard enough to get it shut and lock it. He didn't bang on the door, he didn't scream anything. I think he simply ran off after that. A few minutes later, the actual police showed up, and they searched the property with me. We found the man's phone left on the table in the backyard. The background to the phone was a white guy with a blonde girl, presumably his girlfriend. I note this because the man who was on my stoop was not white, he was Hispanic. I did a little detective work with the cops and came to the conclusion that this man was not originally my Postmates driver, that he had stolen the driver's phone somehow mid-delivery. The police confiscated the phone and left after taking a report. As far as I know, that man never returned to my house, but this was easily the scariest experience of my life. My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and I work at a Walmart by a small town called Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full-time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift, back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working. My shift this one particular night was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was one of only a couple employees doing stock work, and there was 1 or 2 employees at registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't really get much business at these insane hours of the night. However, it was a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in the giant store anyway. I started my night folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. The customer came to the jeans section, and at that time it was around 11:30 p.m., so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in and close shop till usually around midnight. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pants he found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the jeans back. It was kind of awkward. He walked away and I continued with my work. Some time passed, and the store started to look like a ghost town. No one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was like 1 a.m. I had made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back section where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started stocking the shelves. Because the shelves were empty though, I was able to see someone through the next aisle over, and they were watching me. Well, only up until he noticed me notice him. Then he looked away. But his eyes looked really familiar. I stepped closer to get a better view, and I realized it was the same customer from like 2 hours earlier. How in the world could he still be in the store? Without making it obvious, I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a look and see if the man had any items in his hands. His hands were completely empty. No way could he be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something wasn't right. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy might have been following or watching me longer than I realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. Then when I figured it was time to get back to work, I decided I would do grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurts. This took a lot of time to do because I had to check the dates on the products and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through it to the door of the cooler. And I shit you not, it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box full of eggs in front of me. I didn't have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me. Seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that, coming into the dairy cooler, seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors to the cooler open and close eventually. After a while of hiding and not looking, I assumed maybe he left after looking for me. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box and screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over the box. But his smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hand on my lips to muffle my scream, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over, right into him, and the eggs falling to the floor made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't grab me, so I continued to run till I found another stock worker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob, I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining that he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't mean to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem very smart at all. I asked the man why he put his hand on my mouth, and he said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then, shockingly, he gave me the order to finish up the appliance section, and he disappeared. As he was speed walking away down the aisle, I called out, "What's your name?" And he called back, "Tom." And just like that, he was gone. The next day, I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate the night before, and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, said it sounded like complete bullshit. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They then went ahead and checked the camera footage, and a police report was filed when they realized this was a random man, and the cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still work there, but more so as a day stock person or a cashier. What's one place you can go to and find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange does not even cut it for what I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock looking for a new laptop, and by chance I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it though, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy comes up to me and insists he needs a laptop very badly. I nervously said I'm sorry, it's the last one. Then he got angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal, and my heart started racing simply because I don't get put on guard in these kinds of situations a lot. As others looked on at the commotion this big guy was making, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to a line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some other customers on the line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel better, saying the guy was a nut. So, I get home. My family is all asleep already. I go outside to sit in the yard by the pool and set up my new laptop. Then the light on the side of the house turned on. The one that turns on due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. Would that thing go off once in a while? Yeah, but there's a small patch of woods right next to the house, so animals would often run on the property, triggering it. Either way, I'm kind of a big pussy, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room. A car alarm suddenly started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from the inside, so I stepped out to the porch and clicked it off. But then I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I got home, and any cars parked in the street on our block was suspicious enough. We live in a closed-off community, and everyone has huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door. I went to my mom's room and told her I think someone outside means us harm. My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. It would have been a different story having my dad there to tell about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well, and felt ready to throw up, when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door on our stoop. I whispered to my mom I think that man followed me from Walmart. Suddenly the doorknob started to turn as the man tried opening the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on the door. That's when my mom let out a gasp and cry, and my younger sister came out from her room, who also started to panic when becoming wise to the situation. The pounding stopped. Then there was a silence for a while, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom still on the line with 911 with police en route, and there was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window was shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to run upstairs while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there, expecting an attempt at the door or a bang. Nothing. Surprisingly, I heard a police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever heard of. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There they found the huge, dirty, crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once, and we pressed charges. All the while, he was screaming profanities and threats at me, not helping his case. Both cops told me the guy seemed unstable and on some kind of drugs, but told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. So while it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the more dangerous people in our society in your local Walmart. Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or 12 to 7. On July 9th, 2015, a Thursday night, I still have it locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department when I saw in the corner of my eye someone walk past the aisle I was working in. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only two other workers in the building with me that night, Alvin and Baco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we all clocked in at the same time. The person I saw in the corner of my eye was wearing all black, so I naturally walked to the end of the aisle and did a little peep around the shelf. No one was there. I yelled both Alvin and Baco's names, so when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. But regardless, I went back to work. I was holding in a pee for a while, and I told myself I'd go when I finished work in that aisle. Seconds later, there was a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me. I ran over to see what it was, and a bicycle was somehow knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place. It seemed like someone would have had to put effort into knocking this down. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle towards the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. Then there was this freaky-ass sound that I could best describe as a laugh. It sounded like it came from literally the next aisle over. So once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop when I saw a man dressed in all black, waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me, but his head turned so that all I saw was only half his face. Then he suddenly ran, not towards me, but down some other aisle. I heard his footsteps running around. I was faced with a choice of chasing after him or going to find my two coworkers, and I chose the latter. All the while, I heard these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt like were circling me. I found Alvin in the women's department and told him to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Baco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to go to the bathroom. I ran to the employees-only bathroom, which was in the warehouse section. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down. And yes, I'm the kind of person to sit when I pee. The door to the bathroom opened and closed. Naturally, with 3 to 4 people in the building, I said, "Who is that?" And with no answer, I assumed the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again, and someone stepped into view from between the crack in the door. Looking right in, they stepped closer until the crack was completely covered, and all I saw of their face was an eye. Then the whispering began. Unintelligible whispering, but the echo from the bathroom just made it more unsettling. I just remembered I had Alvin's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Alvin to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall laughed one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Alvin to hurry, and 20 to 30 seconds later, Alvin entered the bathroom. He said he didn't see anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed by Alvin the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in, because safety in numbers. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. Nobody went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras, but with no video proof of a breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything he could do. It was all above my pay grade, though. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened. I live in Sydney, Australia. This happened when I was 15 and home alone. It was about 9 p.m. and I was just coming out of the bathroom when I heard my front gate swing open and my dog begin barking. Across the hall, I saw someone run past the porch window and into the backyard. I was able to vaguely make out what he looked like. He was hunched over, had sickly pale skin, was wearing all black, and had long messy black hair partially covering his face. I went into the living room to see what was going on. My dog was still at the front door growling. Since I hadn't seen the guy return, this meant he was still somewhere in my backyard. I waited at the door for a while, when another, more normal-looking guy walked onto the porch and came right up to the security bars. I don't remember all the details, but our conversation went something along the lines of him saying, "Hey, have you seen my friend?" And I replied, "Yeah, I think he's in my backyard." He replied saying, "Okay, because I've been following this random guy all over the place. I think he's on drugs and might be dangerous." This struck me as weird, though. What did he mean by this random guy, when he had just called him his friend? He quickly walked away, going off into the darkness towards my yard. I should also mention that there's a door around back, but that also has security bars in front of it. and the door was locked at the time. I waited at the front door for a bit, then sat back down. After about 2 minutes of waiting, the guy I spoke with walked back onto the porch and looked in through the security bars. He now had the pale, potentially drugged-out guy with him, who was pacing back and forth in an agitated manner. I went to the door to see what he wanted. He said, "Hey, sorry man, I just found him. Look, he's really nervous, and he'd like if you unlocked the door and came out here, just so he could see that you're harmless." I felt a pain in my chest. The creepy, drugged-out guy had stopped pacing now, and was standing unnaturally still, staring me dead in the eyes. There was an uncomfortable silence. I didn't say anything, but stepped forward to push the French door shut, causing the second guy to lunge at me and shove his hand through the bars towards me. I jumped back and slammed the door shut with my foot, bolting it. I called my parents, and they called the police. The two men had gone. When the police arrived, they told me about a break-in that had occurred just down the street less than an hour ago. As far as I know, they never found the two guys. Looking back, it's likely that the first guy ran into the backyard to try to find a way in, and the second guy went to help him, which is why they were back there for so long. What disturbs me is the fact that they didn't want to just break in, nor did the fact that I was home deter them. They wanted me to come outside to them, or to get into where I was. It was a Thursday night. My mom was working a late shift at the hospital. My two brothers were away at college, so for the time being, I had the house to myself. I had a couple friends over. We watched a baseball game, had a few beers, and they left through the back door. I went upstairs to the kitchen to put the remainder of the beers in the fridge and get ready for bed. I went to bed shortly after, and after a while of laying down trying to actually fall asleep, I heard light footsteps coming up the stairs outside my room. My mom was home. I heard her cough as she passed my bedroom door and entered the bathroom. Then she went back downstairs to the kitchen and started making a lot of racket with the cabinets and dishes and whatnot. I was way too lazy to get out of bed to go down there and ask her to keep it down, so I just texted her instead to stop making so much noise. I put my phone back on my desk and flipped on my side to try to get comfortable. Then I heard footsteps coming back upstairs, quickly. My bedroom door opened, and my mom stepped into my room. The hallway light outside my room wasn't on, so I couldn't make eye contact with my mom. But when I looked up, I saw my mom's figure. She stood by the doorway, looking kind of slouched over. I told her to stop making so much damn noise in a rather annoyed tone. When she didn't respond, I sat up and said, "Mom?" A vibration on my desk let me know I got a text, and given that it was pretty late, I naturally checked my phone to see who it was. It was from my mom. She said, "I'm still at work." I dropped my phone onto my bed as I looked up at the doorway. That person standing at my doorway wasn't my mom. Even though I was panicking, I had to think on my feet. I said, "Mom, I need to get to sleep. Get out." I said this because I wanted to play dumb, act like I had no suspicion that someone had broken in. The person at my doorway didn't move, so I picked up my phone, texted my mom in a panic, saying there's someone in the house, I mistook them for her, and to call the police right now. My mom replied back, "Okay," in a matter of seconds. Something then broke the silence in the room. The voice of a woman, crackly and rough. She started saying something. It sounded to me like she was saying, "Don't know where to go," over and over. Her voice started getting louder as I realized